It's no secret that I like rockets. A lot of my previous puzzles have resembled rocket ships, and I hope that isn't getting too old because I've got another one.
Now the plan for the modification I had today was pretty straightforward. I wanted to make a fused modification where I used the fused part of the bandage mod as a base for the rest of the puzzle. So I took all of the center caps off and I tightened everything up, and then I began to glue all of the areas that I was going to be bandaging together. I put 3 of the center caps back in place, and then I lightly tacked the gaps between all of those pieces together. This is the best way to go about gluing together bandage pieces before you commit to gluing them together properly. And after that was done, I made a small cut perpendicular to the corner axis, and this is the final result.
So now that I've made the first cut, I can explain a little more about this modification. What I want to do is bring this point here as close to the core as I possibly can, and then make a plane that comes up to a point well above this corner here. Now while I'm making these cuts, I want to pay attention to where the screw head is. In a perfect world, I could just make the cuts the way I want them to be, but I don't want to cut through that screw head, so I'm kind of boxed into cutting the bottom half of this face off and not the top half. So the bottom half is going to be what we cut down, the top half is going to be where we extend things. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. So if you imagine this plane extended up to a point at the top, I want it there, but I also want it here and here. Okay, so you can see the cuts now. Everything's looking pretty good, but I do have a bit of a problem. These areas here that are sticking out, I've got to get rid of them. Otherwise, I'm going to have to build this whole area out this way, and I don't want to do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this flat surface here as a base, and I'm going to cut these 3 corners off perpendicular to this base. Yikes, fuck that. Okay, I need to focus on these cuts, and I'm going to film this bit. That was actually a lot harder than I was expecting to cut. A lot of these caps need to be glued in, and so I very gently cut them, and then I just kind of tacked some super glue in there as I went along. But that is the general shape done. And so we've got these 3 faces that are going to be built up to a point here, and then we have these faces, which really, I'm not sure if this is their final depth. It probably isn't. But for now, I've just kind of got those corners out of the way so that I can focus on the 3 main faces and this whole area up here. Once I've done this bit, I'll work on this after that. So now what we're going to do is take everything apart and start filling all of the pieces. Actually, on second thought, I might not even need to take it apart. I'm just going to clean out all the flashing and then just stuff them straight full of epoxy sculpt.
A few moments later.
Alright, so I skipped ahead a little bit just because that's pretty self-explanatory. Everything's been filled now, and it's also hardened up too. So what I'm going to do now is take all of these stickers off and just work out the general shape of these extensions. This kind of extension is pretty much my standard operation for really obscure shapes like this. Typically, something of this nature, you'd probably be better off by making a 3D printed core of the extension and then just building on the outside surface of that, or even just making a 3D printed extension to begin with. The reason that I don't use 3D printed extensions is because I have a bit more of an organic design process that's a little more hands-on, and I can't predict these shapes ahead of time because, well, they change on the fly. And so I just can't commit to a particular design. I much prefer it that way, but it does take a little bit longer, and it does use some more material than I'd like to, but the result is, I wouldn't say better or worse, it's just more fun to build. And I'm going to give these surfaces a little roughen up as well, just so the epoxy sculpt has something to bite into. If you try and extend on a smooth surface, it actually does work 90% of the time, but I find that some of them break off, you have to super glue them back on, it just gets kind of annoying. It's better to just do what I just did there, took all of 10 seconds, and now I won't have that problem anymore.
I got the epoxy sculpt out and I mixed up enough to make some crude extensions. All these extensions would do was provide some guiding surfaces that I could use to plan out the rest of the extension.
Well, it's not pretty, but it'll do. I used a spare cubie to build up some volume on the inside of the very, very large corner, It just uses less epoxy sculpt overall.
I took the assembled puzzle over to my belt sander and I began sanding everything down to a more refined shape. I was just trying to get the general idea of where this shape was going so that I could begin building the extensions out to fit that shape.
Alright, so now that I've done that, you can see the extensions still need to be sanded down a little more, but right now all I'm doing is using these faces as a reference for where the planes are going.
I could use everything that I had so far as a reference to build up the corner piece, and I also pretty much had everything I needed to do all of the larger extensions, so I disassembled everything, and then I piled on some epoxy sculpt on all the areas that still needed to be extended. I took everything over to my belt sander and I adjusted the tracking on the belt so that it moved all the way over to the edge. That way it would be a lot easier to sand the sides of the extensions. After I did that, I used a nail file to knock off all of the sharper edges and get everything closer to where I needed it to be.
So you can see what I'm doing here. This piece has been rounded over, so all of the extensions are now in line with the cut lines. Whereas with this one, you can see I've still got these jagged edges all the way around. Then I'm trying to knock back to the same surface that you can see of the original piece. And here is everything reassembled, and I've also lightly tacked all of the pieces together with some super glue just to hold them in place. So now you can see, admittedly, these pretty ugly looking extensions, but the plane that I want to sand down to, I've got plenty of material to remove.
Now that the majority of the extending was done, I could do my favorite part of building puzzles, which is incrementally sanding them down to get closer and closer to the shape that I had initially visioned at the start of this project. Or the shape that I decided to start building after my initial vision proved too boring or I went off on a tangent, which happens more than 50% of the time. I should say there are a lot of areas that will need to be repaired later on, but these are very easy to fix and I don't really need to go into too much detail about them. I sanded down all of the remaining high points, and after that was done, I took everything apart so that I could start refining all of the pieces individually. This would also include doing some further extending on some areas that I hadn't quite built out all the way, and also fixing up that fused corner piece at the bottom of the puzzle.
Now my original plan was to extend out these areas here so that this plane, you can see on the tip of the centerpiece there, would join up with this face here at kind of 90 degrees up and then across like that. But I actually think it'll look cooler if I just fill all of the gaps between the pieces and then just turn it into one big block. And if I don't end up liking the final result, well, I could just build it differently next time. And that's part of the fun of puzzle modding. If you don't like it, well, just build another one. You know, if you have 1,000 cubes to destroy. I also did the centerpieces as well. You can see I've got that little extension there.
Alrighty, let's do this.
After I was finished repairing all of the pieces, I took them over to my belt sander and I sanded them one by one. All I was really doing here was making sure that I could get all of the pieces back together and reassemble the puzzle.
Alright, that's good enough to get it back together. I'll fix up all the little bits and pieces once I've got the final shape done. So now, time to sand this piece, and then I totally forgot I had to sand this piece too. Alright, that's looking pretty cool now. You can see that there are some mismatches between the levels of each of the planes. This is actually a good thing because I'm going to sand down to the lowest point.
After everything was assembled, I took it back over to my belt sander and I sanded all the faces down, getting them all to be nice and smooth and most importantly, uniform. You probably can't tell here, but I have actually moved all of the pieces around within the shape whilst preserving the original structure and making sure all of the high and the low points were evenly dispersed throughout the puzzle. This just makes it a little more homogeneous and it makes the shape more symmetrical. God, I really need to find another word for shape. I used a sanding block to take it from 80 grit all the way up to 240, and after I had done that, this is what the puzzle looked like. It's still a little scuffed around the edges, but that's okay because all of that will be taken care of in the final finishing process. I used a nail file to knock off all the sharp edges on all the pieces, and while I'm doing all of that, I will take the time to thank all of my Patreon supporters for donating a couple of dollars every month to help keep this channel going. This channel is entirely self and fan funded, and sometimes it really does come down to a little support from all of you guys to keep these videos coming out. I know a video hasn't come out for a little while, and that's because I'm actually really busy outside of YouTube, and I haven't been able to find enough time to make videos of the quality that I'd like to make. I have been absolutely overwhelmed with the support over the last couple of years of people that have been welcoming me back onto YouTube. I did have a pretty high-profile channel a few years ago, and it's a shame that that's all gone, but I'm very happy to be growing again, and if you guys want to help me get back to where I used to be, then a couple dollars every month is all it takes to help get these videos out. Thank you guys so much for supporting the channel.
And here it is, the puzzle is finally done, and my god, this sticker scheme turned out so much better than I thought it would. I think I could have moved this green and this green, maybe swapped their places, but other than that, I'm really happy with how this turned out. I did go against the initial rocket leg design. The main reason for that being is that I wasn't actually sure if I could make it aesthetically pleasing, and this stuff has got to look good. That's kind of important, so I decided to go for making sure that the actual structure and shape worked before I do that in a later modification. And also, I just kind of fell in love with this shape as I was building it, and I wanted to go in this direction instead. So as you can see here, we still have 3 faces of full functionality and a lot of shape shifting. I think that looks really cool. You can see this massive corner here that's sticking out to the side. That's what I love about these weird kind of pointy shapes. They end up with this really big corner, which I just think looks really cool. And as you can see down here, we have a very large bandaged area. This is of course a fused bandage cube, so this 2x2 block has all been glued together and does not partake in the solve. There are technically only 3 layers, and so this is a 3-gen solve. And what a solve it must be. I don't have the guts to scramble it, but I don't know, whoever buys it, that's their problem, not mine. And that's about as far as I dare. I hope you guys like this puzzle. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all next time.